We are live. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Happy Thursday. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I appreciate every single one of you that are here. If you're here on Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn, welcome to the place where we believe the truth is barrel proof. I'm Jack Bigadoo. I'm your host, and today we have I don't usually fanboy, but we have somebody that I believe or a brand that I believe I'm a fan of. I will take you back to 2019. I was getting serious about whiskey. I was jumping in, starting to know more, starting to get deeper in. And there was this one brand that I'll always grab a bottle of because I just love every single of their expressions out there. Just love the whiskey profile was just perfect for me. And I had a chance to meet our guest on one of the groups that I belong to. And since then, I was just obsessed. I sent him an email, wanted to know everything about it. Fast forward a year later, I was sitting at that distillery, one of the first distillery that I've ever visited, right there on the edge of Cincinnati. And I picked my first ever barrel pick. And that barrel pick was special to me because that was the first time I was able to help people from the hospitality. I remember driving from Nebraska all the way down to go pick this barrel pig. Everybody wanted to be here and help and participate. And all the proceed, we were able to help people from the hospitality. And so they can actually have something for Christmas. So it's almost 3 years later, I'm having our guest on. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Mr. J, which I can't even say if you're the head distiller, head of operation, I'm sure you have multiple title, but I love it. Jay, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks, Jack. I'm good. I'm good. I'm the co-founder of New Riff. Now I'm the global brand ambassador. But maybe the best description is the whiskey man.
The whiskey man. I love that one. The whiskey man.
That'll work too.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome the whiskey man. Jay, thank you for being here. I've been a big fan of New Riff. I've been a big fan of you and the work you put in. Everybody I've ever talked to in the industry, and I said, "Do you know Jay?" Like, yep. I haven't been any tasting anywhere, any whiskey event anywhere where you don't see Jay. So you all working, and it shows in how the popularity of New Riff. Tell the folks a little bit about you. You don't wake up in the morning and become a co-founder of a distillery. So tell the folks a little bit who Jay is.
Well, in this virtual background behind me is up here to hide my hideous office, but there's also a number of things in this photo that help teach people about New Riff and tell our story. So we are here in Newport, Kentucky, and let's see, I got it one hand. Is it right over here off the screen is the Ohio River, and then across from that is Cincinnati, Ohio. So we were in northern Kentucky on the correct side of the river, however, for making bourbon. We got that much right, at least. So in this parking lot right over here, you can't see it, but a little off the screen over here is a giant liquor store, huge liquor store. At times, it has been the biggest in the country. It's called the Party Source.
Party Source.
Yeah, a legend. And I went to work there in 2001. And to make the long story short, the owner of the store, Ken Lewis, and so my boss from 2001, Ken and I, between the two of us, cooked up the plan that it'd be a great idea if he sold that store and we put a distillery in the parking lot. And blimey, if it worked. Here we are talking to you on the interwebs 9 years later. So that was we opened in the spring of 14. We're about to turn 10. We're going to have a party.
I can't wait.
And I hope you can come. It's been, everything since then, history. So along the way, we found a lot of serendipitous things working for New Riff, including here in this picture right down there. You can just see it. My favorite part. Where is it? Everything's backwards. It's right. Right over there in that parking spot is the top of our well. That is an aquifer 100 feet below the distillery that is supplying us with our whiskey making water. And it's unique water. It is rich and rich and rich with limestone and terrific water. So moments like that made us think, man, someone really wants this distillery built right here,
right at that corner.
So at the Party Source, I wore a lot of hats. I was doing wine education, but I was also the fine spirits manager. I wasn't buying the big brands. I was buying the special stuff, the craft whiskey, the single malt Scotch, the rare cognac. Brought mezcal into the state of Kentucky, things like that. And that sort of creative portion was what I contributed really to the founding of New Riff. Was the whiskey man, was someone maybe with an idea about how a distillery ought to be run and ought to work. So that was kind of where I come from.
Thank you so much.
Before the Party Source, I got into whiskey at the age of 18, and by the time I left my freshman dorm room, I had a little Scotch collection, and I was off to the races. It was one of those hobbies that became a career, I suppose.
As it is for most of us, it started just as because we like it, and now is a little bit of a side gig or a gig. Tell me a little bit of how the distillery came about. Your distillery is very modern with a little twist of still, I like to say tradition, but very modern. I never seen a building like New Riff before. It's so cool. Like you can definitely, you can just stare at it as you come in. Let's talk about the design a little bit of this building. How did it came about? Like you almost can't miss it. You land by the time you land in that airport, you can't miss that building.
Well, we wanted obviously a beautiful site. We were part of, and Ken was very cognizant of building up this campus, this little corner, this parking lot that we have here with the Party Source as the sort of center of it, building this up to be a campus of spirits and good times. And we couldn't just have a pole barn, we couldn't have some industrial park building. I've been to plenty of craft distilleries that run in some very humble situations, and that's great. We needed something nicer than that, something that was a flagship, something that could look beautiful. We also didn't come to this with, and this is part of the ethos of New Riff. We didn't come to this with Grandpappy's recipe.
You're correct.
We didn't have a barn. We didn't have the old warehouse out back. We didn't have a farm. I love me some farmer distillers. We were never going to have our own farm. We work extremely closely with our one farmer who supplies our corn, but we weren't going to do that. So we didn't come to this with a need for the old barn building out in the country, weathered siding, and it's painted red, and it was built by great grandpa, and we didn't have that story. We came to this as an urban distillery, as people new to this craft. Now we had a lot of experience in the alcohol beverage world, and in an expertise of and around whiskey, but we didn't come with old recipes. For example, we didn't find a recipe under the mattress. We were saving in a safe deposit box. No, that's all. That's all a bunch of hooey. There's times when it actually is the truth, like our friends at the Pogue Distillery in Maysville. They literally have all the old paperwork, and the old recipes from their family distillery from the late 19th century. So there's places where that's really accurate. A lot of places it's a completely made up scheme of some marketing. I'm not going to name any names, but there's some stories out there that never happened that way. No. So we wanted to always be, and this is the value, the ethos I'm talking about, transparent. We tell the truth at New Riff. We tell it like it is. We have a few secrets, but for example, the sour mash single malt that we're going to taste tonight.
Right.
We kept this under wraps for a long time.
I was so shocked when I saw it. I'm like, I had to send an email out and ask what is going on at New Riff. I want to know.
So we kept that under wraps for many years. But once it's here, we tell you all about it. And transparency and authenticity is. Honesty is a huge value of ours at New Riff. So we were never going to be this old time distiller here on the banks of the river. We wanted to be a building and a place like this.
Absolutely. And I love it. I feel like newer, millennials and Gen X walking into the whiskey industry want to see something that represent modern, that to see something that, it's like, oh, whiskey also can be a cool place. Hell, I've seen so many whiskeys now that are bottled under Bottle Star Galactica, all these brands that, if you're a nerd like me, where you grew up around modern things, you want to see whiskey also be modern. So I can appreciate that. Speaking of recipes, let's talk about the expressions that you have at New Riff.
Right on.
I'm ready to drink now. So let's talk about expression. If somebody walked you in and say, Jay, I know nothing about New Riff. Walk me through if I had to taste or start trying things or looking at things in New Riff. What is it that I should be looking for or looking at?
Right. Well, the elevator speech, I would say we are very classically inspired sour mash traditional whiskey producers. Every drop we make at New Riff is using what we call holistically the Kentucky regimen, all the things we do in Kentucky to make whiskey the way we make whiskey all these years in Kentucky. And that's usually summed up by sour mash. There's a lot more to it than that. But at the same time, we are very, traditional in our production. We also are gazing forward. So every bottle says on the back, can you see this?
Yeah,
a new riff. If you show it, a new riff on an old tradition. So we know the old tradition, and we hew to that, and everything we make is within that tradition. We're not here to make microwave pressure cooker whiskey that tastes 3 years old in 25 minutes. We're making very classic stuff, but we also give ourselves wide license to take that and, like a guitar riff, a jazz riff, we riff on that, and that's the meaning of the back of the bottle, a new riff on an old tradition.
On a tradition. Okay, so you have a few expressions out there, and some that are more privileged than others, because I saw some expressions and I'm like, why can't I have that one? They're like, oh, you got to be closer to the distillery to have these ones. So we'll get back to that. But I really can appreciate. I think you have the whole book of what American whiskey is now. With the latest release, you just added to it. You just completed the book of what American whiskey represent. There has been a lot of expressions, some special that came out, one-off. But I think when we talk about standard Kentucky bourbon or rye, you're holding, you're holding probably top 10 and things that people that hold the whole umbrella of that. So where should we start if we had to start somewhere?
I would start with, I believe we were going to taste a single barrel bourbon.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Speaking of single barrel, that's how I knew you. I didn't even know your regular expression. Right? I didn't know the regular New Riff. I was introduced to New Riff by your single barrel. For some reason, you were that brand that had just the most. You started a trend before it was cool. You started a brand that didn't mind letting people have single barrels
Yeah.
when everybody else made it almost impossible to be able to find a single barrel.
Well, we had in our time at the Party Source, the store next door, we had the great good fortune. Like I said, I was there from 2001, so we were there working the store um, step for step as the whiskey, as the bourbon industry came back to life, and rye whiskey came back to life, and we could sit on. We were in the vanguard of that. We were helping push it forward, but we also had a front row seat to it all right there in Kentucky. And being the largest store in Kentucky, we had a lot of, shall I say, access to the distilleries, to some special projects with them. We had such a hell of a good time running single barrel programs and selections and projects and things like that. Experiments that we ran with the distilleries. Sometimes we launched other distilleries single barrel programs, private barrel programs. They had never done them before, and they started doing them with New Riff. So we just had a blast doing that. And we realized as we were getting New Riff going and getting ready to launch our whiskey, we've just got to bring that fun experience to our customers and our consumers.
Which I have to tell you, Jay, you guys have the most fun single barrel experience. It's just fun. It's not crazy.
We try to do it right.
For contest, imagine loving whiskey, loving bourbon for about four years in, but you never been to a distillery because you never had a chance to be into Kentucky Distillery. A friend of yours called you and say, Jack, I love your palate. I love how you taste things. I would love for us to have our single barrel. I say, friend, I don't know how that works. I don't think it's possible to do that. It's hard to find a single barrel. They're like, no, there's this distillery called New Riff. I'm like, I know New Riff. I like New Riff. I think they can give us the opportunity to do so. We should do it. And I said, I don't know, man. Say no, the price is fair. And I think with your following at that time, I don't think I even had 10,000 followers then. It's maybe around 5. And you say we should do it. My group here in Ohio really love New Riff. They've always done right by us. You should come and be part of it. And I still remember that's the first ever barrel I've signed. I forget her name, the black lady, the sister that helped.
Creola.
Creola made this experiment so fun. It's the first time, I walked into a distillery, diversity, inclusion, joy was living there, right? I didn't feel out of pocket at all. I didn't feel like I was walking into an old world where Kentucky and whiskey as a black man, knowing what we came from back in 2019, and a year later, that distillery had just people that worked there everybody looked like they wanted to be there, and it was just joy. And we did this barrel pick, and it was fun, and I was like, this is how I want every barrel pick to be. So for all of you guys, when we speak about single barrel, I really think you guys truly hold the light on what single barrel is. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I just want the word to know that.
Thank you. I'll pass that along to the team. Don't tell the boss. We actually would all work here for free.
Yes. So this single barrel, I mean, how many times do you release single barrels for the distillery itself during the year?
Well, we always have our own selections going on in the gift shop. We have typically 3 of them at a time, bourbon and rye, and we sell them really as we need to. We sell sometimes of the year faster, sometimes of the year slower, etc. I don't really have a bead on how many we do. It's worth noting, Jack, that the barrels that get picked into the gift shop are not necessarily the best or better or different or stronger or weaker or anything than what goes out to the rest of the world. We don't spend a whole lot of time mucking about with what barrel should we do this year, this month. Well, let's do that one and that one and that one. Those are good. You tasted that and you tasted that and you tasted that. We do try and mix that up so that different tasters have their barrels represented. It's not always the same person.
The same thing.
But we don't necessarily, save the very three best that month for ourselves.
That's what I thought, because when I went there, when I went to New Riff, I'm like, oh, I need to buy the single barrel from the shop because it must be a special one. And I compared it and I'm like, wait a minute. No.
Yeah, it's good. It's
this one
perfectly excellent, but it's not like all of those are, we get 5-year-olds for ourselves, but you just get a 4. They're all about the same thing.
What is your average single barrel?
Well, you mean in terms of 4 years old? They are not much over 4. Maybe 4 years and a month or 2 at the most, but typically just exactly 4 years. And that's the age statement, aged at least 4 years. Everything gets an age statement, a New Riff. Again, we are transparent. So the barrel proof whiskeys, these single barrels, are 4 years later, they've gone up or down a little bit in proof. The bottle I have is 108.1 proof.
Mine is 112.6 proof.
112. So your barrel would have been stored probably on the 3rd or 4th floor of the Rick House, and the proof goes up a little bit.
Don't tell anybody, Jay, but I have a higher proof than that from New Riff.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And mine was probably on the 2nd floor where it's cooler, and so my barrel that I have, the example I have, went down a little bit. Our barreling proof is 110, which is comparatively low.
And that was my next question. I want to talk about process, grain, barreling, and aging. I wanted you to get a little bit into that. Tell us where you source your grain, if you work with any local people, and how is your. I've seen it. I've seen your barreling operation. I've seen your dumping operation and what you've done with the tour I've had. But can you describe to the folks, what does that look like?
Sure thing. So this is our classic bourbon recipe. It's the same recipe for all of our New Riff bourbon. We make other bourbons, winter whiskey, and all sorts of things. But when we're talking about our bottled and bond and this single barrel bourbon, they're all the same mash bill. The corn is supplied by our fantastic corn farmer. We think he's the best in the business. He is up the road in Indiana, hour and a half away or so. He's got a great name for a farmer, Jack. His name is Charles Fogg.
Oh my God.
With 2 G's. The man is a weather event. Charles Fogg. He's our corn supplier. We think he's the best. We also use what we think is the best rye supply in the business. This comes from Brooks Grain. We're going to talk about our rye whiskey.
All right. Yeah, definitely. We're talking about rye.
And all the barrels, 53 gallons, full-size barrels only. It's worth also pointing out every drop at New Riff distilled in this building, distilled right here in our column beer still. And we make every drop ourselves. We are not sourcers or just blenders or bottlers. We are distillers. And we
do everything column still?
Yes, we have a pot still, but that mostly just makes our gin.
Okay.
So that's the overview of the grains. In this recipe, high rye bourbon, 30% rye in the mash bill. So we wanted to go for mucho gusto. We wanted big, powerful whiskey, not mild, shrinking violet whiskey. And so our mash bill is high rye. That's a great ticket for getting good spicy flavor. High rye, 30% rye. And like I said, it goes in the barrel at 110. We go in at a lower proof for a number of reasons. One of them being that we wanted to catch some flavors that were more water soluble coming out of the barrel, and a lower barreling proof helps with that. But the biggest reason was we learned in our research that the whiskey would show better younger at the lower barreling proof. And so we were happy to go in at 110 proof and cost us more in cooperage, because as we add more and more water to cut the whiskey down more and more, we need more and more barrels. Happy to spend that money on cooperage if it leads to a better whiskey at 4 years old.
Better flavor.
Better flavor, yeah.
Yeah.
So checking this out. Indeed, good spicy stuff.
Good, spicy, nice. One thing I've noticed definitely because of the high ride that you guys use, every time I have New Riff, when I nose it, first thing I get immediately is anise. New Riff is the only whiskey that I nose immediately, because growing up, every time you didn't feel you were under the weather, there was this little soup that my grandma make, which is like clove, anise, ginger, and she would use just a little bit of water and add a little bit of tomato, and it's just that soup that was just hot, and she would chop a bunch of onion in it, boil it over, and then you drink it. That's how you go to bed. Is you need that soup before you go to bed. And that anise, that spice that you get on the nose, that's is always what I get when I nose New Riff. Beautiful anise, a little clovey, but mostly cinnamon and anise is what I get on that nose. Taste wise, it tastes older. Do you know that, right? Your whiskey tastes older than 4 years old.
Thank you. One of my favorite compliments is when people say, and we hear it all the time, I can't believe it's this good for just 4 years old.
I know.
Which sounds like a put down, but it's actually a really high compliment.
Older. Like, I don't know what you guys do, but it tastes older. It almost bothers me, because I'm like, if I tell someone what the age is, they'll be like, oh, you're lying. You're trying to prank me. And I hear that all the time. Or you're just trying to prank me to see if I can guess how old it is.
Right. Well, it highlights the difference between many other 4-year-old whiskeys and what we needed from a 4-year-old whiskey. Most offerings at 4 years old, a distillery, they're on the bottom shelf for a reason. Nobody pretends they're great whiskey or tries to be great. They're supposed to be mixed with Coke, things like that.
Correct.
That's most 4-year-old whiskeys. We needed a 4-year-old whiskey to come out and be banging, to I don't know, go to the San Francisco World Spirits Competition and run the table with double gold medals.
Correct.
Which we did in our first year, 2019. Yep. So we needed a 4-year-old to be, potentially, a great whiskey. Now, I don't know whether we're really there, but it's something seems to be working, and I definitely attribute a hefty part of that to the low barrel proof, which, by the way, also leads to whiskey at barrel proof that are very approachable. Now, I like to add, and I recommend to people these many years at the liquor store, folks have been asking me all those years, how should we drink whiskey? And I tell them, drink it any way you want, just buy it from me.
Anyway.
Buy it from me. Be that as it may, I like to add a little water, especially to New Riff. Let me show your fans something, and I hope this comes across on the interweb, but can you see? You can do this at home. Hold the whiskey up and add a little bit of water, and look at the oils swimming around in that whiskey right here.
And I can, and I have my water right here too.
And now when we nose it, different flavors, different aromas have come out. But if you do like to drink it straight, New Riff is never too strong. It's never hazmat. It's never 138 proof. These onerously high proofs that can be so hard to drink, especially for beginners in bourbon. So if you do like to drink straight up barrel proof whiskey, New Riff is always fun and approachable, even at 114, 115, 117 proof, which we see once in a while from us. It highlights another aspect of our production that I haven't talked about yet, but it's something I always like to. I've probably been accused of harping on it. Here you go. Yeah. Look at this. Look at the oils swim around in there. Look at that smoothness you can see right there in Nebraska. we bottle everything we make without chill filtration.
Yeah.
And
but why?
Means, why? Well, when a company chill filters their whiskey, and the vast majority of them do. I was in an airport bar. always in airport bars. And I was looking at the airport bar, and I realized this was a bar, sadly, that did not have any new Riff. It was in a far off state, and I realized every bottle on that back bar has been chill filtered. They don't have a single thing from any category bottled without chill filtration. When you chill filter a whiskey, you stabilize it cosmetically, but unfortunately, you also remove, or the word I like to use is attenuate, a little bit of everything, sometimes a lot of everything we love about whiskey. The aroma, the flavor, the color of a whiskey is diminished. But maybe the most important, sarsaparilla. Yes. Sarsaparilla all the time. We frequently get that kind of root beer flavor. Some people say, remember those little root beer barrel candies that we grew up with, eating those things. So in chill filtration, maybe the most important thing for a whiskey that we retain in New Riff is the texture. We do not remove any of the oils, the fatty acids. All of the textural components of the whiskey are retained. And so our big, fat, full-bodied whiskey, which begins with this water right over here, there it is, begins with this big tasting water. We preserve that all the way into the glass, and that leads to syrupy, big, fat, ripe textures, mouth coating, and that leads to whiskeys that don't drink as hot as many others. People drink it and say, well, that doesn't drink like 114 proof.
Yeah,
that's right, because it's not chill filtered. We left all the texture in there. This is full fat whiskey making. This ain't no 2%. It's not skim milk, right? It is creme fresh. It is full fat. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about your rye, because your rye is probably one of the most respected rye in the whiskey biz.
Thank you. So we're tasting now our bottled in bond rye without chill filtration, and we'll talk a little bit in a minute about bottled in bond, but about the rye, the mash bill, which anytime we can, we put it on the back of the bottle. 95% rye, 5% malted rye.
95.5, the secret
Not
recipe.
5% malted barley, 5% rye. And so we call that 100% rye.
You said 95% rye and 5% rye.
5% malted rye.
Malted rye, okay.
Yes. So we're making here a very spicy, very powerful rye whiskey, and is bottled in bond. Everything we make, all the whiskeys are bottled in bond. When we come out with something new, for example, winter whiskey, I have an empty. Oh, it's not empty. Yay! I have some left. My wife will be thrilled. Here's
I think there is an interference on your.
This was just released last week on Black Friday, and we have some. Look at this, bottled in bond without chill filtration. That's the only way.
I'm not sure what's going on with your sound, but it's crickling. So I'm not sure if you got that better.
Is it okay now?
Let me see.
Should I use the microphone?
Yeah, probably.
Let me try that. So everything we make is bottled in bond, and we take because of that maybe a little different approach to bottled in bond than most distilleries have a bottled in bond, or they have what's called a line extension. But we choose everything is bottled in bond.
Let's see.
Let's try that.
Much better. Much. There was something interfering with your mic. Not sure. If it's, there was like an
maybe the CIA is scoping me, or aliens or something. Who knows? Anyway, everything we make is bottled in bond. That is because we recognize the category of bottled in bond, and we write it on the back of the bottle. Since 1897, that is the world's highest standard for quality in a brown spirit anywhere. Higher than the standards in Scotland, higher than the standards in a great spirits region like cognac. So we realized as we were bringing New Riff to market and figuring out how we will do this, we thought, should we have a bottled in bond? And we realized, no, we should only make bottled in bond, because if we really mean it, crossing our heart here, the logo, that quality has to come first at New Riff. How can we not bottle everything at the highest quality standard?
Correct.
And so we do. So there is no black cherry flavored New Riff. There is no 90 proof small batch, no 2-year-old from a small barrel. Everything is bottled in bond without chill filtration.
I truly respect that. There is something to be said about holding that standard for everything you produce.
You had said, Jack, you learned about us really through our single barrel whiskey, which
Correct.
is not surprising in many markets over the years. Our single barrel is our biggest seller. But for us internally, us distillers, those of us in the distillery, our favorite things we make are the bottled in bonds, because anybody can make a single barrel. That's relatively easy. The commitment it took to make only bottled in bond is special to us. We know what that took and how rare that is. And so for us personally, our favorite whiskeys are usually the bottled in bond items, because of that very rare commitment, that everything we make is at that highest level. So how does this drink? It's a big rye, again, a supple rye. We do attain a decent amount of sweetness for a rye, but it is still a bit drier than bourbon. The 5% malted rye is very important. It's like a leavening agent that helps mellow out a little bit the thunder, the potency of a 95% rye recipe. But putting in 5% of that malted rye, which we're going to taste in a few minutes, our malted rye, and then we'll really learn what malted rye is like. But what does it do in this recipe? It's a little bit of a softening agent into this whiskey. So smelled up, nosed it straight up.
It's, for me, it's like walking into a bed of lavender. It's floral. It's beautiful. For me, it's probably one of those truly floral rye out there. It's like being kissed by just this bouquet of flowers, lavender, a little bit of lilac in there, just being pushed in your face.
Damn, you know your flowers, Jack.
but when you taste it, that sweetness up front, just nice, beautiful, supple, almost toffee-ish sweetness, but the spice is not permanent. That spice doesn't hit you to the point, oh my God, this is just hot. It's just a medium progressive spice. And I love that.
Thank you. Yeah, we hope to make highly characterful but balanced rye. And dare I say, sensational in a cocktail. It's a mission of mine not only to teach people about no chill filtration and what a difference that makes in a sipping whiskey, but also in a cocktail. It adds texture to a cocktail. The flavors have sustained. They sustain all the way through the sip of the cocktail to the very end. Very important in a cocktail. And at 100 proof, good thumping proof, just a great mixing proof for your old fashions and Sazeracs. I was drinking some Sazerac the other day. In fact, one of my favorite cocktails to make with our rye, and they would hang me for this in Louisville, but I don't care. I'm from Greater Cincinnati. I'm from Newport, Kentucky, up here. Is a rye mint julep.
Okay.
Oh, it's fantastic. You're talking about all the florals notes and things you're getting. A very common flavor that I find in our rye is a mintiness.
Spearmint
or
spearmint is that
winter green things like that. Yeah, it's this more floral expression of mint, and sometimes that crosses over into the note we saw down there a few minutes ago about sarsaparilla. That is so fantastic in a mint julep. Some people put wheated bourbon in a mint julep, and that's fine. To me, that gets dominated by the mint. But you use a rye mint julep, and the mintiness in our rye, it mingles with the mint. And, oh, it's so good. And I do not even wait for the horse race. Jack. I drink mint juleps 12 months a year with New Riff rye. So so try that. Get on that horse.
I'll have to try it. I'll have to try
rye mint julep. Yes, sir.
So is your rye, speaking of malted, right? Is your rye malted, or is your rye malted, or do you guys malt it in-house?
Right. So we certainly bring in malted rye. I remember Ken Lewis asking me as we were forming up New Riff, just thinking about it, and he said, "Now, are we going to malt our own barley?" And I said, "Ken, that would be a spectacular way to go out of business. No. We don't have the wherewithal to malt our own barley. I so admire the places that do malt their own barley or their own grains, but we did not want to commit to that, particularly in our bourbon, for example. It has 5% malted barley. That would be an awful lot of trouble to go to for 5% of the mash bill. So we bring in all of our grains. We don't malt anything ourselves. Sometimes we have things that are malted to our order or to our specifications or at our behest, but we don't malt anything ourselves. It would be fun someday, but no, I don't think so. So the grain for this malted rye actually comes to us from Germany. When we made malted rye for the first time, our head distiller, Brian Sprantz is his name, brilliant guy. And he came to us from the brewing industry. He was a brewer at Boston Beer and other breweries around town. And and I'm a brewer too. I'm an old home brewer, but Brian is a professional. He's a really great brewer, probably the best brewer in Cincinnati. He doesn't even make beer anymore. He makes whiskey, and he's becoming a really great distiller too. Brian knew where to go to get malted rye. There was not and still is not a really great supply of malted rye in America. Probably better than it was 9 or 10 years ago, 9 years ago. But American craft breweries do not use very much malted rye. And so we couldn't get a supply of malted rye in the 8,500 pound increments that we needed. Our supplier just didn't have that stuff. So we went to where they do have a lot of malted rye, and that's Germany. There's a tradition of malted rye beers made in Germany. They're called Roggen. And there's entire regions that is the classic beer of Germany. And so the grain for this comes to us from Bamberg, Germany.
I'm telling you, I'm obsessed with the nose on this.
Oh, yeah, man.
What is that? It is particular. I know I've smelled it before, but I just don't know what it is.
Well, it is, in a word, it is soft. When we made this whiskey, I had tasted in my long career one malted rye ever. It's still a very rare whiskey mash bill in America. And at the time, nobody was making this in Kentucky. And there was one nationally that I had ever tried. And so I didn't really know what happens when you malt rye. What happens to the grain when you malt rye? And I wondered, man, what if it becomes super spicy? What if it accentuates the spice? No. That's not what happened. Taste it. It got elegant, sophisticated, gentle, soft. In a word, it got malted. And so now I think of this whiskey as a malt whiskey first and a rye whiskey second. It is one of the malted whiskeys of the world. It just happens to be made with malted rye, not malted barley. So nice, soft, spicy, so round,
licorice in the back.
Yeah, it's still spicy, but the spice it's so much softer and gentler in its delivery. Yeah, it's just gorgeous stuff. Wow. Glad you like it.
Never had it. This is my first time.
Awesome. Yeah, it is delicate, really refined stuff, and helps to be 6 years old. It's a bit older than the 4-year-old of our standard releases. It's special stuff. Yeah. We did So people ask sometimes, Jack, what do we think about finishes, barrel finishes, cask finishes? And I, of course, had long and very much experience at the store with those kind of things. I made some finishes when I was some barrel finished whiskeys, some projects when I was at the Party Source. So I always had liked those, but we have not wanted to get into that really at New Riff. Everybody and their cat is making finished things all the time. 10 more releases of this, and we got 5 more finishes coming out, and it's a bit much. And often there doesn't seem to be a really coherent reason for why someone did a finish. It often looks like it was just a reason to get another whiskey on the market.
Correct.
Or at a minimum, what story are you telling with that new wine barrel in a barrel finish? And often there's not really a story. And that's all well and good. And we enjoyed those kind of whiskeys too, but we didn't want to make them here. Well, if we ever did do a finish on a whiskey, I would want it to tell a story. Really's got to be a reason why we did that, something that compelled us to do it. And as we bottled malted rye, and this came out on the market, and I began to interpret it as as I was saying, a malt whiskey first and a rye whiskey second. Then we began to think, what if we did to it what other people do around the world with malt whiskeys, namely put it in a sherry cask, give it a wine finish.
Correct.
I haven't been a huge fan of barrel finished bourbon. There's already so much wood on a bourbon because of the new charred oak barrel that it often doesn't fit another barrel on top of that so well. Often, not always, but that's my opinion. It's a different animal in used barrel whiskey traditions, like in Scotland or Ireland or arguably Japan, where in used wood you've got plenty of room in the flavor to put another layer of wood on there, but not so much in bourbon. So we never really wanted to do a finish in that, but we tried it in malted rye. And a year ago, a little more than a year ago, came out with malted rye sherry finish, and it worked. We liked it. We liked it enough that we did it again. We played that riff again. And so I'm pleased to say that there are some sherry casks sitting in our warehouse, which are full of our malted rye whiskey, and will be coming out again to the world. It's a very limited thing. We can't make too much of it. For one thing, we don't want to take away too much from the production of this,
Correct.
More barrels that get finished mean less barrels of this that go out. But we will see some more of that, and I think we can hook a brother up.
All right,
Jack, with a little bit of malted rye sherry finish. It was a fun project.
Yeah, I cannot wait to try it. Before we move on to your baby, the new kid of the New Riff family, I want to talk about something that I believe just went through under the radar, but only people that truly were paying attention did pick up. I want to talk about this.
Oh.
So this idea
Yeah.
of the backsetter, tell me how this idea came about.
Oh boy.
And the releases that came through, because this is unprecedented, like you said, right, on the bottle, and you use peated sour mash, and I think there's another version of this one, of the backsetter too.
Yes.
But you guys, is almost like your experimental version of New Riff. So I want to hear more about that.
Okay. Well, there was another one. There was a backsetter bourbon and a backsetter rye. I'm pleased you have one. So to tell the story of backsetter, once upon a time, it was, again, we were forthcoming about what was in it, but it was the tip of the iceberg of what was really going on behind the scenes. So thank you. I love them too. These came out in 2020, or was it 2021?
It's end of 2020 into 2021.
Yeah, I think it was right around there. So I can now tell, and it's almost a better way to start from the beginning, which is the sour mash single malt project that we have here. So we started making sour mash single malt in 2014. We had barely been distilling, not even 6 months yet, before we launched on this intrepid, mad scheme of malt whiskey production. And we made, and this is the next thing we'll taste, so we're going to talk about it anyway.
Correct.
But now I can tell the story of Backsetter in a little bit more fulsome manner. So we made, when we went to make these whiskeys, we were not sure what would work. We were not sure how will malted barley react to going through a column beer still like we have behind me here in this picture. What is that like? We have a pretty good angle on doing it in pot stills. We know what that's like, but there weren't very many opportunities ever to try a malt whiskey distilled in Kentucky, sour mash whiskey making regimen in a column beer still. And so, being maybe a little humble, even, we didn't come at it from some dogmatic angle of we know just what kind of the mash bill should be. We didn't know. So we tried a lot of different things. We mashed and distilled 100% Maris Otter, which is a barley variety from Britain, which is used historically in some of their great ales. The next one we made was 100% Golden Promise, which was a malted barley from the Scotch whiskey industry.
Correct.
Classic Scotch barley. The third and the fourth whiskeys are where, yes, we made 4 and counting different malt whiskeys. The third and fourth ones are where Brian Sprance got real creative and made whiskeys inspired by beer recipes. So those two are inspired. They're whiskeys, but there's no hops in them, but they're inspired by beer recipes. Whiskey number 3 is a barley wine, and it includes a little bit of chocolate malt that you might put in a barley wine to make it that certain something, to make it a little bit dark, a little bit chocolatey. Chocolate malt goes in that. Whiskey number 4 was a Belgian quadruple style mash bill. So we had gone nuts and made all these different whiskeys in the search of what would work and would provide us with some good material to someday make sour mash single malt. And then Brian and I sort of both mutually decided, it came to us separately, but we realized after not wanting to do peated whiskey, we realized, wait a minute, if we're going to live up to the back of this bottle, a new riff on an old tradition, how can we not also make peated whiskey? And I came in and told this to Brian, and he said, dude, I was thinking the same thing. So we made peated whiskey also. And see, in a bourbon distillery, today's whiskey distillation provides the sour mash, what is called the back set, because it is the whiskey byproduct. It's called stillage, and you set some of it back, and so it becomes back set. Mm-hmm. Isn't that's old time Kentucky distiller logic, mm-hmm. or language at least? Back set. So today's whiskey becomes distillation, becomes the back set for tomorrow's beer, for tomorrow's fermentation. Mm-hmm. So at New Riff, we often make rye whiskey that becomes the back set that goes into the bourbon. And then we make bourbon that becomes the back set that goes into the rye. And what flavor contribution does this make to the whiskey? And it's a little inscrutable. Even the greatest distillers will tell you only up to a point that they understand what's going on. And at some point, they just accept, you know what? We were taught, and everybody before us taught, that this makes the best whiskey in Kentucky, the best way to make whiskey. So that's how we're doing it. But it adds, among other things, it saves energy, the sour mash process, because you're adding boiling hot back set back into the kettle where you are mashing. So it provides some heat. It saves on liquid because you're reusing some of the same liquid. So you save a little bit of water. But it also adds a flavor. And it adds more solids back into the whiskey, which are important because when we distill in the column still, the column beer still right here, the entire mash, all the beer, all the solids, the grains, everything goes through this and gets steamed, gets pounded with steam. So adding more solids is a good thing also. But up to a point, the industry doesn't really understand how sour mash is working, and neither did we. We just did it that way because we were taught, and we believe it makes the best whiskey.
Correct.
So when you are making, again, today's distillation becomes tomorrow's backset. So sometimes we have bourbon backset, and sometimes we have wheated bourbon backset, and sometimes we have malted rye backset, and sometimes we have rye whiskey backset. And there was this certain day where the whiskey we had made the day before was that peated distillation.
Okay.
And the only backset we had was that peated backset. And we went ahead and rather boldly did make a batch of rye and 2 batches of bourbon with that rye backset, not with that peated whiskey backset, the peated malted barley, not expecting that it would make a flavor, let alone that we would turn it into a product that my friend Jack in Oklahoma, or in Omaha, Nebraska, would someday be drinking here on the interweb. We didn't think that would happen. We just said, literally, I think Brian Sprance's words were something to the effect of, "Fuck it, let it ride, let it go, man. Let's just make it. Get on with making bourbon." We had to make bourbon and rye that day, and the only backset we had was the peated. So we didn't go into it thinking or knowing it would add anything. Years later, we are there tasting a sample, and here's an example of a lab sample bottle, and we're tasting this stuff all the time, and realize, boy, this is weird whiskey. Why is this so smoky? What the heck happened? Oh my goodness, this is the peated backset.
Correct.
And we realized the peated backset had made a flavor, and that became an absolute mind warp of whiskey flavor. So you taste that whiskey there, the backsetter. Do you get some peat? Do you get some smokiness? Right? But it's not fair to call it a peated whiskey. When we make wheated bourbon, we put wheat malt or wheated, we put wheat in the recipe. When we make oated bourbon, which is, once again, the winter whiskey is made from a chocolate oatmeal stout mash bill. When we make oated bourbon, we put oats in it, right? When you make peated whiskey, you put peated malted barley in the mash. But we didn't put any peated malted barley in the backsetter. We only put in peated backset. It became like a magic spell, a magic trick. How did we make whiskey with a peaty flavor without adding any peated barley? It became a whiskey that was impossible. Right? It's impossible to make that without doing that. But we didn't do that. We didn't add peated malted barley. So the mash bill on the back of your bottle of backsetter right there on your desk in front of you, Jack, look at the mash bill on the back label, and it says 65% corn, 30% rye, 5% malted barley.
Correct.
It doesn't say that we added any peated malted barley.
No.
And what we did, never meaning to, it just became... This is what happens when someone is willing to make a new riff on an old tradition. And when you go into that with an open heart and a commitment to making good whiskey and a little bit of bravery even to let things ride and make it that day and cast the iron, cast the die and see what happens. Well, what happened was we made that backsetter. And it was a side effect of the giant program that was, this is like the Manhattan Project of New Riff. Sour mash single malt is an insane project. We're going to talk about this in just a minute. But backsetter was a side effect of that. And we realized we got to release this to the world. This stuff is just too cool. It went completely over the head of almost everybody in the bourbon industry. All the bourbon clubs, the bourbon bros, very few even whiskey journalists comprehended what was really going on. And only a couple of people said, whoa. You made peated backset? Where is the peated malt whiskey? Show me the peat whiskey. Where is that stuff? And almost nobody grasped that, and nobody understood. Bothered to ask, well, what's going on here? Why did you make that other whiskey? It was just too weird for most people. Backsetter is one of my favorite things we ever made. It is such an example of our whiskey making, of the fact that we are here making this stuff in the distillery. We're not. I mean, who would ever source peated Backset whiskey? First, I want you to make peated malted barley whiskey, and then I want you to make our Backset recipe with that. That's insane. Right. It is a product of the back of the bottle, a new riff on an old tradition writ large. What happens when people are doing this in honesty and creativity and exploration and innovation? And that's what came out, Backsetter. So that's a long story, but Backsetter is it's a crazy ass whiskey. The craziest thing we ever made until we made this stuff. You might want to hold. Do you have a bottle there
of the Backsetter or
the single malt?
The single malt. Yep. I'm
holding
it. I'm holding it really.
Thank you.
Really close to me. So let's get into the new kid of not necessarily the new kid, because the way I can describe this, I wouldn't really say the new kid, because a few things came at the same time as this came out, but I feel like it was only limited to the secret people club, I call it, at New Riff. There's a few things that come out of New Riff that only people that knows, and if you don't know, you just don't know. And I will remind people that live around your area to definitely keep an eye on those. But I was behooved. Behooved will be the I was shocked. I'm like, here's a question as an average consumer. Was New Riff trying to jump on a wagon because everyone is making American single malt, or was it something that New Riff actually intentionally wanted to do? Right. That was the first question that came to mind as an average consumer.
Right.
Now, as an educated consumer, I can clearly see this is 7 years old.
Exactly. Yes.
What that means is that 7 years ago, Jay and his team were thinking about making American single malt before we seen this wave and wagon of people jumping American single malt like it's the new thing on the market. So now that we know that you were already thinking about that with the malted rye, when did you know this was ready to be out?
Well, Jack, we by the way, I hasten to add, it's a 7-year-old age statement, right here at the bottom. Yeah. But actually, what's in the bottle is 7 and 8-year-old. We began distilling this in December of 2014. In fact, the oldest whiskey in this bottle would have turned 9 years old in about 2 weeks from now. So this is a blend of about 60% 8-year-old. And the rest is a 7-year-old age statement. So that's why it has the age statement of 7 years. But we started making this, again, less than 6 months into our careers as distillers. We kicked off this project. And Brian, the brains behind this, or the heads of the project, were myself and Brian Sprance. And we came at it internally from slightly different directions. I was wanting to make a malt whiskey as far back, or thinking about this as, I don't know, 2012, 11, early in the process of getting into New Riff. I was curious about what would malt do. But when Brian got into it, he brought to it a beer aspect. I was more inspired by the malt whiskey traditions of the Celtic nations, of the British Isles, certainly Scotland, Ireland, etc. But Brian wanted to explore malted barley as a grain category. And so he, like I said, he brought to it these beer recipes, which are totally unusual and one of a kind, and they bring so much vibe to this whole project. So this is a blend of 5 different mash bills, Each one of them distilled and aged separately. 5 mash bills. All of those are aged into 6 different barrel types. I went through the whiskeys a little bit before. They were, I'll run them off quickly here, but Whiskey Fancies is adding, which malt did you end up using for this release? Whiskey Fancies, we used all of them. We used 5 different mash bills. Maris Otter, 100%, 100% Golden Promise, the barley wine recipe, the Belgian quadruple style recipe, and finally, it is about 10.8% peated malt whiskey in this. And we distilled every one of those ourselves here in our column beer still in full sour mash effect. And so these are, we don't call this American single malt, Jack. This is Kentucky single malt. Says it right here on the label.
That's also my question. Why
sour mash single malt?
Why that expression? Why did you use?
We wanted to be clear to people that this is Kentucky style single malt. This is a malt whiskey, but it's made in the Kentucky whiskey style of whiskey making, not in the Scottish or any other style like that. It's not pot stilled. It is sour mashed, column beer still, feeding a doubler in the classic Kentucky expression. So there's a lot to talk about with this whiskey. I haven't even gotten to the casks. I will in about 10 seconds. But the very, very short elevator speech, if people say, cut to the chase, what the hell is this like? I tell them, this is the malt whiskey that drinks like a bourbon.
Okay.
And indeed, when you take a sip, it's not, believe me, I adore single malt scotch. It's the greatest whiskey in the world. It's a huge part of my background. I love delicate single malts. This ain't no delicate single malt. This is big, fat,
8 proof,
fat, full-bodied, heavy whiskey, very much like other Kentucky whiskeys. So this is sour mash single malt, not a single malt that's trying to be a scotch. That was the one thing, 2 things Ken Lewis said to us about this novel project. Again, we'd never heard of anything like this very much in the industry. He said 2 things: don't blow the place up, and number 2, I don't want you to make scotch. Don't try to make scotch. And we have not. We have made Kentucky single malt whiskey, sour mash single malt. So about those casks, we also were humble about what kind of barrel is it. Should we put this away to the warehouse in all charred new oak barrels, because that's just what you do in Kentucky?
Correct.
I had tasted a few malt distillations from Kentucky, and in my opinion, they were always over oaked. They were aged, because they were straight malt whiskeys. They were aged in new charred oak barrels, and in my opinion, I could be wrong, I thought that malted barley was too delicate of a whiskey to stand up to all new charred oak. The corn-based whiskey that is bourbon does that with no problem. The powerful flavors of rye whiskey do it. But I thought that the malt whiskeys I had tasted, they needed to not only be aged in new charred oak. So we knew going into this that we wanted to age in new charred oak barrels and used barrels. So the barrel types for this, I will count them off. There's 6 of them. New charred oak barrels, char number 4, toasted, just like all other new Riff, new charred oak barrels at the time. We aged them in used barrels that were decharred and then toasted. That's where they take a machine and they dechar the inside of the barrel, and then they toast that. That's 2 kinds. We use decharred and then recharred barrels. So that's 3 kinds. We used red wine casks, which were French oak and American oak. One of them came from Robert Mondavi. So these were some nice red wine barrels. We used, number 5, Portuguese brandy casks. Who knew? We got Portuguese brandy casks in freaking Kentucky. And so we got some of those. And finally, we aged some of this in Oloroso sherry. So this rapidly became just ridiculously complicated.
I'm just thinking about the vatting process of this. That's my brain is like, I'm like literally short circuit. Like my brain cannot comprehend.
If you want to read anybody out there the really full story, go go to the New Riff website, and up at the top is a category that says news, and that drops down to say blog. And if you go there, there's a big, big, big long blog post telling this entire story. But it wound up being sort of not just one adventure, but like 3 adventures. First was the adventure of distilling all these different mash bills. And then the adventure of aging them in all these different barrel types. Because again, we weren't certain what would work. And we were afraid if we put them all away to one kind of cask, we would come out 6, 7, 8 years later and say, oh man, it's too much of this. We didn't want to take this chance. So we spread around all the different barrel types. That was another adventure. And finally, it was a huge adventure this past summer, of our team, myself, Brian Sprance, Brian Martin, our assistant head distiller. The 3 of us were the team charged with blending it up, with vatting it. And that was its own adventure, because we had to figure out, and it's not in equal parts, figure out how these 5 recipes with 6 mash bills across 2 years of production, Jack, right? All of that had to fit in to this jigsaw puzzle of how it works. And this was what came out. So what do we have here?
A very oily.
Yes, oily.
Nose remind me of almost burnt cookies.
Some tasters online the other day were reviewing this, and one of them said brownie edges.
Yeah,
brownie
edges.
There's a chocolate element in this, again, because the barley wine recipe of malt whiskey recipe number 3 includes a little bit of chocolate malt. And that little bit of chocolate malt comes all the way through this whiskey into your glass.
Dark
and
chocolate.
It gives some cocoa notes, but somebody combined with the small amount of peated whiskey that is in here, it lends it a little bit of a smoky, burnt brownie edge. Is a wonderful tasting note. I love that.
All right, let's
taste. It's delicious straight up. It doesn't need water. It's not at all too hot, and it's also open. It's not closed. Some whiskeys are unchill filtered whiskeys are very sort of closed up and tight until you add water, and then they positively explode. This one is open and accessible, and the flavors are available to me when I sip it straight.
It is bold.
But straight up, if we just thought of 2 elements, and the analogy I use for this sometimes is, so I'm a musician, I think in musical terms sometimes, is a mixing board. And we are mixing different flavors. And that's kind of how we came to think of it in the blending process. We have all these different sliders on the mixing board with all these whiskeys and all these cask types and all these vintages. How do we slide these things around? And so the slider I'm talking about here is the barrel. Tasted straight up, it is barrel forward, right? The barrel is
very much so.
Is ahead.
Literally is little that mouthfeel. Give you the oak, and
it's oak forward.
It's very much so oak, but you get that. It's like when you chew on dark chocolate, almost like that fully uncooked brownie. You got to chew on it a little bit to get almost that. It's like, it reminds me of there is this German chocolate brownie that I get for the Christmas, and it literally is chips of German chocolate that you got to bake with this brownie. When you chew on it, you get those caramel note and those dripping note of that chocolate, but you get that brownie that almost cut the top of your mouth with those edges. And it's just, for me, at the same time, it's floral too. There's that floral note there. There's that dark chocolate, a little bit of savoriness, but immediately very much so floral. It is, the way I describe this on my channel would be as a thinker.
I like that.
I like that. You cannot just have a sip and go, oh, this is good. You have to think about it. You have to sit with this. I will be literally taking sip dropping water in, taking sip, drop. It's so complex, it's so rich, it's so deep that it's a thinker. You have
Thank
to
you.
deepen.
Thank you. So the beautiful thing is, cask forward with straight, you add the water and the casks come back a little bit and the grains come out. And that is really fun. It's like a if I could use an automotive analogy, it's like a sports car, and you can tune the suspension to oversteer or understeer, or to steer that way or to steer this way. How do you want it? Do you want a softer ride or a harder ride? You can tune it with water. That is so much fun. When I drink this and I hit it with water, I hit it like 2 or 3 times with a little water. It's like having 3 different drams. There's so much experience in each glass of our sour mash single malt, because the grains come out, and now you start to taste a little less of the wood and a little more of all those grains that are going in there. By the way, I want to point out on the label, if you'd like to hold that up there and show people this little code right here, that's a little bit of an Easter egg, the code on the front.
Yeah, 230511.6.
Yep, that stands for, the first 2 digits are the year, 23. The next digits are 5 for 5 different mash bills. 11 different types of malted barley went into all those mash bills. And finally, there are 6 cask types. So that little code will change every year when we come out with sour mash single malt. And yes, indeed, we're going to come out with this every fall, and it will change from year to year a little bit.
It's definitely a fall expression. When you are a little cold outside and you need something good, you just have to think about life in general. This is what I will call a conversation pour. You have to talk to someone. You have to have that hard, difficult conversation. This is what we pour, because it's gonna be a minute.
Yep. So citrus, I get like a caramelized orange peel a little bit. Some citrus things come out, and most interesting to me as a Scotch lover too, there's this quality of great freshness.
Water. Water is changing this thing.
Doesn't it move? Yeah.
There's
some people, I sometimes describe it as ozone, the aroma of the air after a lightning strike. This extreme freshness in the atmosphere. It's almost a zestiness. I get that in this. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know how we got that into this whiskey, but I love that we did. And it emerges with a little bit of water. So much fun to move from drinking this straight at 113.8 proof to a little water, have some of that, maybe a little more water. And then at the end, hey, add a little more whiskey, take it back up, play around with it that way. It's
congratulations.
Thank you. It's something else. We are thank you so much.
That is not, I don't believe, I really do not believe. And oh my God, that finished spiciness when you add water, it's like you're right. It's like it's evolving in weird ways. And it tells you the layer of how many layers deep is this vatting you guys did. Like, my mouth is confused right now because I don't know if I'm having something sweet, spicy, flowery. I don't know. It's so interesting. I would say this, that I don't think there's anything like this on the market. I don't believe so. I think
I might be inclined to agree.
If there's something that you can pride yourself on, you definitely created something that is not on the market. You did.
It's an insane project. And if any distillers are out there, I could suggest this is a crazy way to go about it. I think Brian and I realized some time ago, man, what have we done?
Correct.
We have made a monster. How do we ever come with this? Because we just can't burst out onto the market with 5 different single malts and all these different casks. That would be confusing to people. We needed to streamline this into a sort of regularized, if you will, product. And by the way, in the fullness of time, not only will we come out with this vatted, this New Riff vatting of, as it says here, the fall 2023 vatting, but we will in time come out with all 5 of those other recipes will be released in very limited fashions. We don't have a lot of them, but we will not blend them together and let people try the barley wine. Let people try Golden Promise. You know, some of these barleys.
If you excuse me for just 1 minute,
yeah,
shut off something real quick. Yeah,
sure. Well, while Jack is away, I'm going to have a sip of malt whiskey. By the way, I should add to
there's always a window I have to shut because my for some reason I forgot today. My house is right closer to closer to a nursing home, so I feel like almost around 6:30 every night there is always one person that has something, so you get the ambulance.
Oh dear.
When I started hearing it from a distance, I'm like, well, let me go shut down that window.
Well, drink a toast to that person.
Definitely. Oh man.
So Jack, we have seen some comments pop up down there. I don't know where what of the several platforms we're on they are coming from, but I'd encourage folks out there, if you have any questions, please put them into whatever chat is in front of you.
Oh yeah,
and we'd love to answer some. So
absolutely. As you guys bring your question in, I have a question.
Yeah, fire away.
How do I join the Magic Club?
I think what you're referring to, Jack, is the New Riff Distilling. It's called the New Riff Whiskey Club.
Yeah, New Riff Whiskey Club.
New Riff Whiskey Club, and
because that club always gets special stuff.
You can find that at newriffwhiskeyclub.com. Very simple, and it's a club. It's free to join. You can go to the website and join it up. Free to join. You never have to buy anything. What we have in the Whiskey Club is a way we hope to, as equitably as possible, and it is never ever perfect. There's someone always mad that they didn't get the thing, but
and that someone is me. We tried to release. I was like, you know, I am so not happy right now.
As equitably as possible, and trying to be fair, it is a way for people to find some of our rare whiskeys. Often, when we have a rarity, we bring it out in the New Riff Whiskey Club. Here is one example. This is something called High Note.
Yep, that's the one I'm talking about.
Yeah, this particular High Note happens to be a malted rye whiskey, 8 years old, barrel proof.
Yep.
And this was about 2 or 3 barrels that we saved back from our first distillation ever of malted rye. What do we do with 3 barrels? We can't take 3 barrels and put them out to the world. That's ridiculous. So we put them in the New Riff Whiskey Club. And it's a way to have launches of things. Winter whiskey, the first time, winter whiskey did not launch in the Whiskey Club, but a good example would be Balboa rye, which is our heirloom rye whiskey. The very first release of that went into the New Riff Whiskey Club. Subsequent releases went out to the world. Correct. But the first time we released something, red turkey wheat, you know, those kind of things, they go out to the Whiskey Club. The issue with the New Riff Whiskey Club is at this time we are unable in that Whiskey Club to ship to people. So you have to come to the distillery to pick things up. I'm sorry. There is concomitantly and in a completely parallel situation to the Whiskey Club, we do have an online vending shop where we can ship to, I don't know exactly how many markets, but very many markets. And you can see that from our website also. But the whiskeyclub.com is its own animal. And sometimes things sell out in 2 hours. Sometimes they sell out in 8 minutes. And
the last one sold out in less than 10 minutes.
Yeah, it's first come, first served. That's just the way we think it is most fair, to everybody. And so we do our best, but that's the newriffwhiskeyclub.com.
I do not like it that it is fair.
You live too far away, my friend.
That's it's. I remember the first release that you guys had back in 2019 or 2020. I was there the day it was being released. So I kind of walked in and I got the email and it was there and they're like, oh yeah, you can have it. And I'm like, okay. And it was a lot of fun. I love that you're doing that. It create a little bit of that special thing for people to see a little bit, have a peek into what you're doing and what what it's coming up. Speaking of what's coming up, what should we expect 2024?
Well,
the average consumer expect in 2024 or new Riff fans should expect?
We have some new things coming out. There will be I don't want to spill all the beans and get everyone excited about things too far in advance, but we do have. So here was this example of an 8-year-old, very small release in the High Note collection. Eventually, we will get out to where we have a little bit of older whiskey to release. We've got 8-year-olds, 7-year-old and 8-year-old whiskey in this single malt. There will be a new edition of this, and it will change. I mentioned those cask types, the red wine, the Portuguese brandy. We never got any more Portuguese brandy barrels. So that whiskey will change when it comes out for 2024. We will have at some point, actually, I think it's available right now. There will be another shot of the winter whiskey, which is itself a very cool whiskey. This is, we call it winter whiskey, but it really is internally, we referred to it ourselves as chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. This is a bourbon recipe that is made with oats. And it stems from a conversation that Brian and I had. I thought one day, what about oats? And I talked to Brian. I said, oats. We could put oats in whiskey, right? You can make oated bourbon. Why not make oated bourbon? And Brian, in his brewer's point of view, said, I remember it's something like he said, oatmeal stout. And then he said, chocolate oatmeal stout. Next thing I know, we're making chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. But coming to the market, we wanted to, we realized some people, some percentage of bourbon consumers will not know what the hell is a chocolate oatmeal stout, because they're not beer drinkers. And B, some of them will say, chocolate, you're putting chocolate flavored whiskey, New Riff, what the hell? No, that's not what we did. So we wanted to avoid that confusion. And so we market this as winter whiskey, and it comes out in the winter. And it's a thank you to our friends and followers, and especially to our partners in the trade, retailers, bars, restaurants. They get a large amount of the winter whiskey as well. I'm happy to say that while winter whiskey is the hardest whiskey we make, it's really hard to make a 95% rye recipe. That is a degree of difficulty that is way up here in the whiskey making world. Well, oats are even worse. I'm happy to say, though, that over the years, we have gotten better and better at making oated oat bourbon. And so we now can make a little bit more winter whiskey. So we've gone from, one batch a year to several. And so if you have trouble finding winter whiskey, pardon me, sit tight. There will be some out there eventually. And you'll find some of that also going out to the market. You can find some in some of the better stores and retailers and New Riff supporters where you live. We will continue to expand across the country. 27 states now, and we will get out to a few
I
more
swear
next year.
you read in my mind that, because that was my last question. Distribution.
Right.
Distribution.
Mhm.
I've been hoping with all the crap I give New Riff, they'll be like, you know what? Fine, we'll come to Nebraska. But that still haven't happened in 4 years. A lot of people
We'll
here,
get there.
I believe, I had half of a barrel, and that half barrel sold. When we brought it here for the folks, everybody signed up for it, and that half barrel was gone in 30 minutes. People love New Riff in Nebraska, and I truly believe it'll be a good market. As you expand, I'm hoping that distribution get wider and bigger, come our way. I'm sure Iowa would love to see y'all, and Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, South Dakota, Kansas, all these areas.
We are in Minnesota, and
Okay.
we are in both of the Dakotas,
Okay.
and doing wider business there all the time.
That's
We
that.
will we'll get to Nebraska
So
someday.
we are the redheaded stepchild. That's what you're saying.
You are on the list, my friend.
So I hope to see more of that. You guys are doing amazing things on the market, and new innovation is what is the word I can use. Let's talk about what is so not popular at New Riff that I actually truly enjoyed. Let's talk about your gin.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, gin. So I am actually Jack, the gin, the creator of the gin recipe at New Riff. It's called Kentucky Wild Gin,
Mhm.
and it is. I'm a gin nut. I was raised by a gin nut. My dad is a martini man. He raised me to know gin, and so I had to have a gin. So we've been making gin from our first year. The first batch came out in 2014. The first thing you ask yourself as a gin maker is, well, what style are we going to make? Is it London Dry, Old Tom, or New Western, citrus forward, whatever? Silky. Whiskey fancies the gin is silky. I love it. The gin is also unchill filtered, and it retains all of the botanical oils, and so it is a richer silky. I love that. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to write
I never
writing that down right here.
I never
So,
hidden a bottle from anybody,
so
but
the
no one knows where my gin is from
yeah.
New Riff. That's how much I love it.
Awesome. Well, the gin is stylistically, one asks what kind you make, and I wanted a gin. Some people call them around the world. They call them terroir gins. They are
Mhm.
gins made in the locale with things from that location. My philosophy is anywhere you are in the world, possibly excepting Antarctica, but there is some plant growing there that can go into a gin.
Indeed.
They make some in Australia or in Africa, and they call them bush gins.
Mhm.
There is a gin from Africa made with, I'm not making this up, elephant dung.
I know
So
who makes it.
you may have heard that. So you can make a gin from anywhere. And I wanted a gin from where we come from our home, from this place, right? From the Ohio Valley, from Kentucky. What kind of botanicals do we have here? We don't have groves of citrus trees, and we don't have fields of coriander. We have actually the most important ingredient for gin growing all over the state of Kentucky, and it's the juniper. We have a juniper species growing here. It's called the Eastern Red Cedar. And this is a juniper species. When you drive down the highway in Kentucky, there are pine trees all the way down the road. All of those pine trees are juniper trees. That is how thick Kentucky is laden with juniper. So we had the local juniper figured out. Then I found another local plant called the American spice bush. This is an ancient seasoning in Kentucky in the Ohio Valley. The settlers ate this stuff. It's was served in Civil War kitchens. The indigenous peoples use this in their cuisine for centuries upon centuries. It's called the spice bush. It puts out, I don't have one here in front of me, I'm sorry, but it puts out this little red berry that tastes kind of like allspice. Some people call it American allspice. So these both go into the gin, along with 9 other botanicals that form up a relatively classic gin. But it does have this spicy element from the spice bush. It has the cedary element from the local juniper. And these aren't gimmicks. I don't put in a teaspoon of local juniper. I put in about 4 pounds into the recipe. So by dint of all this, plus one other secret ingredient, it's not a secret ingredient, but the base of the gin is corn grain neutral spirits, which we redistill. And then the other part of the base is unaged New Riff rye. We take some of our rye new make, the White Dog, and that goes in the whiskey, and it becomes a tremendous textural addition. Talking about silky gin, a big reason why is we put in some unaged whiskey into that, so we have the heaviness of that base spirit. By dint of all that, I hope we make a gin not only distilled in Kentucky. There's not very many gins distilled in Kentucky. Everybody makes whiskey, not only distilled here, but from our homeland, from our fields, our forests, our woods, and a true expression of where Kentucky comes from. So this is a Kentucky native gin. It's called Kentucky Wild Gin. We make two versions of it. We make a plain one, and then we make one that is barrel aged and rested in the barrel for about 6 months before we make it. How could we not make barrel aged gin as well?
Correct. I just wanted folks to know about that, because I was shocked and I loved it. I really much so loved it. And I thought it was probably one of the best gin I've had that you can literally have neat. I love me a nice Negroni. You cannot tell me that Negroni is not the best thing on the planet. But when I can have a gin neat, I know it's good gin, and that gin is unlike anything. Like I say, the word of this interview, the word of the day is innovation. You are not stopping. You are innovating, and for all of us, it's a lots of fun. The question here, somebody wanted to know, is that oated bourbon on the market now?
Right. The winter whiskey is, we did have a release. Some of it went out for sale in our gift shop on Black Friday last week. There is some going out to the rest of the world. And our distributors and stores and so on. It is a limited item. So be very good friends with your best local liquor store. Ask them to carry New Riff, because the way that a store can get some of that in the first place is by being a supporter of New Riff. We obviously want people who know where New Riff is going to be found to be able to go to that store and find things like winter whiskey. So we be sure and make sure that New Riff fans find it that way. So make good friends with your local retailer. Ask them to carry New Riff, please. And you can, in the fullness of time, I think, get hooked up with some of the winter whiskey, chocolate oatmeal stout bourbon. It's cool stuff. Very cool stuff.
Yes, it is cool stuff. Jay, thank you for actually taking your Thursday and coming and sit down and talking to me.
My pleasure, man.
Talking to the audience and telling us all the ins and outs. You're probably the most transparent interview I've had in a long time.
Thank you.
You are not afraid to tell anything and everything. For all of you guys here, I will tell you this. I know everybody rushed to go do the Kentucky Bourbon Trail, but I will give you one advice from my own experience. Do not start the trail right in Louisville. I need you to land right in Cincinnati and get you a rental car and start a New Riff. You go to New Riff, you start your trail there. It's only an hour and a few minutes away to get yourself to Louisville from there. You trust me, the drive is also beautiful in and out. I promise you, start at New Riff. And if you're a Scotch lover like me, my favorite store to buy all my Scotch from is right next to New Riff. That's where I go to pick up all the cognac and Scotch that I cannot find anywhere else on the market. Not only you have an amazing distillery in front of you, you have an amazing store that is next to it. But for all you folks here, check out newriff.com. You want to check out the website. You want to see what they're doing. I don't think there will be enough time here for us to tell you every single expression. But the best part, from what I've found out, subscribe to their mail. They're good at communicating every time something come out. You'll get an email for any new release that come out. So even though I know the PR let me know what comes out. I also have my own email subscription to actually know what is coming out. I joined the club. The whiskey club is free. I join it because just in case I'm around the distillery around that time, I can stop by and grab something. From what you can see, Jay is not afraid to, with his team, they're not afraid to bring something new, something crazy, something out of the ordinary. But if you're looking for whiskey right now, this is the whiskey of the year to actually have. For the sheer curiosity to own a whiskey that is so different than anything else, I need you to go look this up. Talk to your retailer if they carry New Riff. Ask them, do you have this? I need this. It's not what you think, it's not what everybody is doing. It is completely, completely different. Walk to it with an open mind, and I promise you, you're going to be mesmerized. That's the word to you. Be mesmerized by it. Jay, any last word?
Oh, you've put it very well, Jack. Thank you so much. Couldn't agree more. Come see us. Actually, the Cincinnati airport, I'm pleased to say, is one of the better bargains in the whole region when it comes to airline prices. Sensational way to begin a trip into to bourbon country.
Correct.
Is to actually fly into Cincinnati, and from there get down to the rest of Kentucky. Y'all come back now, as we say.
Yeah. I landed. Cincinnati was my first stop. 20 years ago when I came to America. First flight came down to Cincinnati before I came to Omaha, Nebraska.
Really?
So wow. I would tell you, I have a history with it, but I really love what you're doing, Jay. I cannot thank you enough. If you guys are here or watching the recast, if you have any questions, if anything that we didn't talk about that you want to know, make sure that you actually reach out. Make a comment, send me an email. Trust me, I know how to reach Jay. He for someone who owns, co-founder of a distillery, he answers these emails. That's what I'm gonna tell y'all. That's what's weird about this gentleman. He answers his email, and any question you ask, if he has the answer, he will let you know. He's not afraid. He's as approachable as his whiskey. That's the best way to describe the man. He's as approachable as his whiskey. Thank you all so much for being here. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you guys stopping by. And like I said, if you have any questions, don't forget to reach out. We'll see you next time here on The Truth is Barrel Proof.